I paid every bill, cooked every meal, kept the lights on while they lived like royalty in my home. Then one night at dinner, my son smiled and asked me to leave. But he forgot one thing. The deed still had my name on it. So I filed the eviction papers. And what came next? It wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a reckoning that shattered everything we called family. The house I've kept alive for 30 years breathes with the quiet of a place that's been worn thin by gratitude never spoken. The paint on the siding has begun to curl like old bark. The hallway walls are pale and faded where picture frames used to hang, photos of family moments I dusted weekly, even after they stopped meaning anything. Every morning, I rise before anyone else. I've always done that. Not out of obligation, but out of instinct. The coffee is already brewing when the first door opens. I fold the laundry no one asks me to do. I track the bills and keep receipts filed in labeled folders sorted by decade. The plumbing works because I handled the paperwork. The lights stay on because I made sure they would. Connor, my only child, now in his 30s, rarely says thank you. He walks into the kitchen like the air belongs to him, smooth and decisive, phone in hand, barely nodding in my direction. "Mom," he'll mutter in passing, with the same tone someone uses when they greet the mail. He doesn't look like me. He never did. His face is all sharp angles and polished hair, expensive watches and loud silences. He works from home now, consulting, though I've never quite understood what that means. He has a corner office upstairs and takes calls at a volume that fills the house like music I never requested. He lives here with his wife, Elise. She's beautiful, graceful and polite, with that tight smile that seems permanently affixed to her lips. She always asks if I need help, but never moves when I decline. Her voice is soft, but her silence is firm. If Connor dismisses me with a wave, she's the one who closes the door behind it. They moved in 5 years ago. "Just until we find our footing," Connor had said. I didn't mind. I wanted them to feel safe, to feel at home. And they do, completely. So much so that they've forgotten whose house it really is. I still cover the utilities, the mortgage, the groceries. They pay for streaming services and trendy home decor, but the essentials are mine, always mine. They know it. They just never say it. Dinner is a routine I keep out of ritual. I cook because the silence feels heavier when I don't. Last Tuesday, I made chicken pot pie from scratch. Elise complimented the crust, but Connor barely glanced up from his phone. "You're still using the same recipe from when I was 10, he said, poking the filling. "You should try something new." "I didn't realize it was outdated," I replied gently, my hand still on the dish towel. He didn't answer. Elise gave a soft laugh and changed the subject. "That's how it goes now." I speak in measured tones, choosing words like stepping stones across a river I can't quite cross. They say very little back, just enough to maintain the illusion of civility, of family. But the cracks are showing. There's a guest room that used to be mine. That's where I sleep now. They've taken the master bedroom, needed more space, they said. I didn't argue. I'd already begun folding into smaller and smaller corners of my own life. Most days, I clean what no one sees, maintain what no one remembers, and listen for what no one says. This home doesn't echo with warmth, it echoes with avoidance. And I've lived in it long enough to understand that love, when it becomes conditional, turns into something far more dangerous than absence. It becomes currency. And lately, I've started to feel broke. I've noticed the small things. Connor's reluctance to involve me in decisions. Elise's carefully polite tone when reminding me of a better way to do laundry. The way they close their door during dinner parties and emerge later, as if I were just the help. Sometimes I catch my own reflection in the microwave door. Faint, hunched, tired. Not from age, but from years of shrinking myself down to fit their expectations. I remember when Connor was little. He used to come into the kitchen and wrap his arms around my waist without saying a word. He used to ask me questions about the world, about how things worked. I wonder when the curiosity became contempt, when comfort became entitlement. Now, I move through the house like a caretaker no one hired, quietly managing the details of a life that no longer includes me. I still label leftovers. I still refill the soap. I still check the mail. I still try. But the trying is starting to feel like begging, and I don't know how much longer I can do it. The dining table looked different that night. elongated by new chairs, dressed in minimalist gray linens Elise had picked up from some boutique. My usual place at the end, the one I'd occupied for decades, was missing. A folded napkin and silverware rested at the far corner instead, like an afterthought. I didn't ask. I sat where they placed me. Elise served the plates, moving with a grace that made her complicity look effortless. Roasted salmon, wild rice, greens with vinaigrette. It was plated beautifully, Instagram ready, but by the time the final dish reached me, the fish had cooled, and the rice clumped like it had waited too long. Connor cleared his throat halfway through his second glass of wine. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "Mom, Elise and I've been talking." The room stilled. I set down my fork. "About what?" "About space," he said. "About boundaries." I watched him carefully. His jaw tightened with each word like he was working through something unpleasant but necessary, a rehearsed speech. "You've been here a long time," he continued, "and we appreciate everything you've done, really. But Elise and I are in a different phase now. We're building something." Elise's eyes stayed on her plate. Connor leaned forward, elbows on the table, something I used to correct when he was a child. "It's time you thought about what comes next. Maybe something smaller, simpler, somewhere you can focus on yourself." I blinked slowly. "You're asking me to leave?" He exhaled, relieved that I'd said it first. "I'm asking you to make space." He said it like it was a kindness. I looked at Elise. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Inside, something crumpled. I smiled to keep it from showing. "That's fair," I said softly. "It's your home now." Connor nodded, satisfied. He toasted his glass against Elise's without ceremony, like a deal had been made. But I didn't taste the rest of my food. I couldn't even feel my fingers around the fork. After dinner, I cleaned the dishes alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the guest room, surrounded by the hum of the old radiator and the soft creaks of the house I'd kept from falling apart for 3 decades. I stared at the corners, at the paint I'd chosen, the carpet I'd installed, the door hinges I'd oiled so many times they never squeaked. The next morning, I pulled out the old file box, the one with the original purchase agreement, the mortgage closure, the notary records I'd kept like sacred scripture. There it was. My name. Not just on the documents, on the title. The deed had never been transferred. Legally, the house was still mine. A slow pulse began in the base of my throat. Not rage, not even triumph. Resolve. They thought I was a relic, but this relic still held the keys, and I wasn't going anywhere. Sleep betrayed me that night. I lay in the dark, flat on my back, eyes wide and dry, as the ceiling overhead blurred into shifting shadows. The sheets twisted around my legs like anchors. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Connor's face across the dinner table, blank, resolved, like I was a burden he'd finally worked up the nerve to shed. His words echoed in fragments. "It's time you thought about what comes next." What comes next? After 32 years of cooking meals, covering bills, keeping the house warm when the pipes threatened to freeze, staying quiet when Elise rearranged the living room like I wasn't standing in it. What comes next? I rose sometime after 2 a.m. The house creaked around me. Familiar sounds, the refrigerator motor, the wind brushing against the eaves, the low tick of the thermostat adjusting. My house. My bones knew every corner of it. I wandered into the den and stood in the glow of the streetlight, filtering through lace curtains. I looked at the framed photos on the bookshelf. Connor's high school graduation, his first day at college, the vacation we scraped together in 2005 to Disneyland when he was 12 and afraid of the rides. Back then, he used to slip his hand into mine when he was nervous, when he didn't know the world yet, when he still trusted me to guide him through it. Now he wanted me erased from his life like I was a worn-out chapter. I paced. Where would I even go? Retirement wasn't even a whisper for me yet. My savings had been drained by his tuition, the medical bills from his broken wrist, the emergency credit card payments when he lost his first job and didn't tell me for 2 months. I didn't own a second property, didn't have family nearby. Elise's parents were comfortably distant, and Connor certainly wasn't offering suggestions. A cruel question surfaced. What if I left? Would they miss me? Or would they just fill the space? I drifted into the office and pulled out the old metal filing cabinet. It groaned open like it resented being disturbed. Inside were folders sorted by years, each tab labeled in my neat handwriting. Deeds, utility bills, tax returns, repair receipts, maintenance ledgers. All of them had one name at the top. Mine. The mortgage closure notice, the last property tax receipt. I flipped page after page, highlighting what should have been obvious long ago. I hadn't just built this home, I owned it. By sunrise, the exhaustion had calcified into something else. Not peace, not yet, but the beginnings of a stance, like a boxer sitting on the edge of the ring, wrapping her hands, deciding she's not ready to stay down. Later that morning, I took a slow walk next door to Janine's place. She was sitting on her front porch in a fleece pullover and leggings, drinking coffee with the newspaper folded beside her. A ceramic gnome watched from the corner of her porch rail like a tiny sentinel. "Up early," she said, not looking up. "Didn't sleep." She raised one brow. "Uh-oh." I sat down heavily on the wicker chair beside her. The cushion made a soft sigh beneath me. "I need to ask you something," I said. Janine finally turned to look at me. Sharp gray eyes, short white curls that refused to stay brushed. Former paralegal turned gardening addict, she was the closest thing I had to family in a 3-mile radius. "Shoot." "If someone asked you to move out of a house you paid for, a house that's in your name, what would you do?" Janine paused, then set her mug down carefully. "I'd laugh," she said. "Then I'd change the locks." I swallowed. "It's Connor and Elise." She didn't speak right away. She picked up the paper, rolled it up tightly, and tapped it against her knee. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the dinner, the missing seat, the speech, the suggestion that I make space, the smile I forced to keep from shattering in front of them. And then I told her about the documents, the title, the quiet realization that I still legally owned the very home they wanted me to vanish from. Janine listened with her whole body. No interruptions, no wide-eyed shock, just a slow, simmering fury that settled into her bones like a truth she'd always expected to surface. "You've got receipts," she said when I finished. "You've got decades of them. And you've got motive. Not to be spiteful, but to protect yourself." "I don't want to throw him out," I said softly. "He's my son." "Then don't," she said. "But don't let him throw you out either. You're not some tenant. You're the foundation." I shook my head. "I don't know if I can—" "Yes, you do," she interrupted. "You just don't want to be the villain in his story. But you need to stop worrying about his version of you and start living your own version." I looked down at my hands. They trembled slightly. "I'm scared." "You should be," Janine said. "That means you're alive. It means you still give a damn. But being scared doesn't mean you stop moving." I nodded, barely. She leaned closer. "You're allowed to be tired, Delilah. You're not allowed to disappear." Something in me shifted at that. Like a puzzle piece I'd long ignored snapping into place. I went home and pulled the deed out of the drawer again. I pressed my thumb against the corner of the page. It was time to stop letting people write me out of my own story. The courthouse smelled of paper, old carpet, and something sterile that clung to the walls like permanence. I stood just inside the lobby, clutching a manila envelope against my chest, like it was the only shield I had left. My fingers ached from gripping it too tight. The envelope held the papers, Form 310, verification of ownership, a notarized letter of legal intent, an eviction notice. My son's name typed neatly under occupant. I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd stared at the ceiling all night, mouthing the same sentence again and again. This is not revenge. This is reclaiming. Alan Marks met me at 9:07 a.m. sharp. His office was tucked into a corner of the second floor, the blinds tilted just enough to let in winter light without glare. A tall, lean man in a gray tweed blazer, he greeted me without hesitation, extending a firm hand and gesturing to the chair opposite his. "I read everything you sent," he said, his voice a calm anchor. "It's all in your name, utility bills, mortgage, deed, taxes. Legally, you're the sole property owner. You're within your rights to file for eviction." I nodded slowly. "But he's my son." Alan folded his hands on the desk. "You're not evicting your son. You're evicting a man who's taken advantage of you and attempted to displace you from your own property." I blinked. The clarity of it stung. He said he just wanted space. Which would be fair, if the space was his, but it's not. Alan leaned forward slightly. Delilah, you've carried this house and that family for over 30 years. That's not sentiment. That's a legal fact backed by records. You're not being cruel. You're setting a boundary. I exhaled, slow and shallow. He'll be furious. Yes, Alan said. But fury doesn't nullify the law. I signed the final page. My hand didn't shake. Outside the courthouse, the wind cut sharp. I pulled my coat tighter and walked with a pace I hadn't known I possessed. Every footstep echoed in my ears, not from noise, but from finality. The papers clutched under my arm didn't weigh much, but they might as well have been fire. At home, I placed the copy on my nightstand. Not hidden, not flaunted, just there. Mine. 3 days later, the official courier delivered Connor's copy. He came barreling into the kitchen like a storm without warning. His shoes tracked salt across the tile. His hair was a mess, face flushed with disbelief. You served me? I didn't stop drying the dishes. Yes. His voice rose. You filed eviction papers against your own son? You asked me to make space, I said evenly. So I did. I filed to take back mine. You've lost your mind, he spat. You can't do this. It's already done. Connor ran a hand through his hair. You have no idea how this looks. Elise's parents, my coworkers, everyone's going to think I'm a monster. I turned to face him. Then maybe you shouldn't have acted like one. The silence that followed was thick and jagged. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. Later that night, Elise knocked on my bedroom door. She stood in her oversized cardigan, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea, like it might shield her from the confrontation. I just wanted to talk, she said softly. I didn't answer, but I stepped aside to let her in. She sat on the edge of the chair near the window, legs tucked underneath her. Connor's not handling this well. I noticed. She looked down. He doesn't mean to be cruel. He panics when he feels powerless. I raised an eyebrow. And I'm supposed to absorb that? No, she said quickly. I'm not excusing him. This is a lot. And I was hoping maybe we could find a compromise, maybe a transition plan. 90 days instead of 30? Elise, I said quietly, you watched me cook, clean, pay bills. You watched me get served last at my own table. You never spoke up. Not once. Her mouth opened, then closed. I know you think you're not part of this, I continued. But silence is complicity. You let him hollow me out. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I nodded. I believe you. There was a pause. Then I added, but the papers stand. She left without arguing. Just a nod. A quiet retreat. That night, I sat on the porch with Janine, both of us wrapped in blankets, sipping weak tea as the sky faded into bruised blue. I did it, I said. I know, she replied. And we watched the stars blink to life, one boundary at a time. The click of the new lock echoed like a small revolution. I turned the key twice, felt its smooth resistance, then heard the satisfying click of security. My security. The old lock lay on the tile beside the front door, a relic of life when I had no voice. Inside, boxes waited. I worked through the afternoon, moving cushions, repacking closets, shifting furniture. The leather chair that sat unused near the window now centered the living room. The TV cabinet moved aside. A lamp replaced a dusty vase I felt no longer spoke for me. Light. That word settled in the corners. By evening, I'd sent new keys to Connor and Elise via certified mail. It felt right to give them respect even when boundaries were firm. The next morning, Elise arrived with a tray of tea, jasmine and ginger, with a tentative smile I recognized from the early days of their marriage. I thought you might like something warm, she said quietly. I accepted it, surprised at the gesture. Thank you. She lingered at the doorway, gaze flicking toward the now empty guest room. If you ever want to talk? Thank you, I said again, meaning it more each time. The shift was subtle in Elise, her voice softer around me, her presence no longer defined by Connor. She still avoided confronting him, but her distance from his outbursts spoke volumes. Connor showed up later, rescheduled for a seemingly spontaneous dinner. He carried flowers, mistakenly selecting yellow tulips. When I looked at him, the petals wilted in his hand. I'm sorry, he said plainly, for everything, for suggesting you leave, for how I spoke. I overstretched. I listened. No cracking, no reprisal. Thank you for saying it, I replied. I appreciate the apology. I just need space now. He shifted, uncertain. Space? Yes. Emotional, physical, all of it. He nodded and left. No fighting, no tears, just space. That night I opened my journal, its pages unmarked for years. My pen glided across the page, the words spilling out. I feel lighter. I feel my name again. Some boundaries are hard, but some boundaries are necessary. I wrote until the lines blurred, until I fell asleep clutching that pen like a lifeline. Janine arrived at dusk, wine in hand, the bottle rattling against the stemware she carried. To new locks, new keys, and new me, she toasted, purple serum glimmering in the low light. I raised my glass, voice steady. To knowing when to lock the door. She giggled like schoolgirls, and the warmth in her eyes told me everything was possible. The next morning, Derek from across the street knocked on my door, mid-60s, salt and pepper hair, always watching from his porch, quietly present in the nights I couldn't sleep. I noticed the new furniture layout, he said, nodding toward the center chair. Nice. Oh, thanks, I said. Just trying something different. He studied the room. Looks like it works. That's the point. He nodded. If you need help moving anything heavy, or just company, I'm around. I handed him coffee. I might take you up on that. Later I discovered Elise standing on the porch again, windows rolled down. I want you to know, I see you, she said. Not just as Connor's mother, as you. The words shimmered in the mid-morning light. I nodded, suddenly light enough to float. I'm glad, I said. She smiled. I just want you to know. I watched her go. That afternoon, I sat with Janine and Derek on the porch, the two of them sharing small talk like constellations rotating around me. I realized I didn't feel empty. I felt claimed. I emailed a college friend in New England to say hello, for the first time in decades. I sketched plans to repaint the guest room in calming teal. I considered taking a cooking workshop just because I wanted to, not because I was preparing for a dinner. Change didn't feel like uncertainty anymore. It felt like choice. After sunset, I floated around the house rearranging pillows and discovering empty corners that existed only for me now. I placed the journal open on the desk, the words a reminder of my promise. Before bed, I passed the wine glasses I used to reserve for Connor and Elise on the dining shelves. Now I kept only mine. I drank from it later, slow, savoring. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from recognition. This was my house, my name on every paper, my decisions, my second chapter. And tonight, I slept for the first time in a long time like the foundation of my life wasn't shifting. It was finally settling. The first sign that Connor wasn't going to let go quietly came in the form of a voicemail left at 3:12 a.m. You've made a serious mistake, he said, his voice slow and cold. You need to be ready for what's coming. I listened once, then deleted it. But the weight of his tone settled in my stomach like a rock. 3 days later, a thick manila envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside, notice of legal challenge. Connor had retained a lawyer and filed a formal response to the eviction. He was contesting not just the grounds, but my ownership entirely. The name on the letterhead was someone I recognized. Michael Ralston. Expensive, strategic. The kind of man who wouldn't take a client unless he smelled blood. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the envelope. The room felt smaller somehow. But I didn't panic. I called Alan. We met in his office that afternoon, warm wood paneling, and the faint scent of old books surrounding us. Alan read through the response quietly, his expression unreadable until he exhaled through his nose. Well, he said, it's aggressive. Can he win? I asked. Alan leaned back in his chair. Not if everything you've told me is documented. The house is in your name. You've paid every bill. He'd have to prove you were mentally unfit or coerced into property transfer, which didn't happen. Correct. He nodded. But we're going to have to show up strong. He's going to try to paint you as unstable, vindictive. I'm neither. He smiled gently. I know that, but now we prove it. We scheduled a court date for early next month. 4 weeks, 28 days to brace for the storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spiraled through the worst-case scenarios like a carousel from hell. Connor, spinning lies, Elise backing him up, the judge siding against me. The idea of standing in a courtroom, alone against my son, made my skin crawl. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on the door. Elise stood there, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She held a canvas tote clutched tightly against her chest. "I need to show you something," she said. We sat at the dining table in the soft glow of the pendant lamp. The shadows fell long across the wood as she laid out the contents of her bag. Bank statements, account transfers, emails between Connor and his financial advisor, names I didn't recognize, consultants, shell LLCs, internal transfers marked home repairs that I never authorized. "I didn't know about most of it," Elise whispered. "But I saw one of the documents last week and started digging. He's been pulling money from your account for years." I stared at the printouts, my hands going numb. Every document had my name attached, every number annotated with something vague and deliberate. Connor's name was never front and center, but the connections were clear. "How long have you known?" I asked. Elise looked away. "About a week. I should have come sooner, but he's not easy to defy." I nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." She reached into the bag again and handed me a USB drive. "There's more on this. Screenshots, copies of his communications. Alan can use it." I didn't ask why she was helping me. I didn't want to ruin the moment by peeling back her layers of guilt and complicity. Instead, I said, "Thank you." After she left, I sat at the table for hours, the papers fanned out before me like a map of betrayal. The lamp above buzzed faintly, and I could hear the city humming through the windows. At 3 a.m., I called Alan and left a message. By 8, he called back. "This changes everything." He reviewed the files quickly, his voice more animated than I'd ever heard it. "These aren't just shady. These could be criminal. Misuse of assets. Financial elder abuse. Do we go to the police?" "Not yet," he said. "We build the civil case first. But this gives us teeth. You've gone from defending a home to exposing a fraud." The shift in tone was immediate. Alan moved forward with a revised filing, adding charges, citing financial abuse. The eviction became the backdrop to a deeper battle, one I hadn't planned for, but now felt ready to confront. When we hung up, I stood at the same table and reread every printout. I used yellow sticky notes to label each connection. I highlighted transfers. I wrote questions in the margins. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was strategizing. Janine came over with her reading glasses and helped me cross-reference account numbers. Derek dropped off dinner and offered to install a lockbox in my bedroom for sensitive documents. "This is bigger than a power shift," Janine said. "This is your reckoning." I nodded. "And I intend to see it through." That night, I slept 5 hours straight. For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I felt like I was running toward justice. It started with the silence. After Elise handed over the documents, the air in the house changed. She stopped lingering near me. No more cups of tea, no more tentative apologies in her eyes. She moved through the space like a shadow, small and careful, as though she feared being seen at all. Connor, on the other hand, became louder. First came the guilt. The morning after Alan filed the new paperwork, I found Connor in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like it was his throne. "You know," he said, without looking at me, "I read the new claim. It's impressive how thoroughly you're willing to embarrass this family." I said nothing. He turned to face me. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're dragging your own son into court over some money and a piece of land." "This isn't just about money," I said calmly. "Oh, so now it's moral high ground? Right, that checks out." He poured himself coffee. "You know what people are going to say? That you've lost it. That this is about revenge, not rights." I stood straighter. "Let them talk." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You always were good at playing the victim." That one landed. Later that week, he sent me a text. "You might win in court, but you'll lose everything else. Don't forget who supported you all these years." I deleted it, then screenshotted it, then printed it. The verbal tactics became more aggressive by the day, short bursts of confrontation in shared spaces. He'd mutter insults when he passed by, ungrateful, paranoid, unfit. At night, he played music too loud, slammed doors, left messes in the kitchen he knew I'd want to clean. He knew the buttons to press, and he pressed them with surgical precision. I started documenting everything. Every insult, every veiled threat, every discarded receipt, every accidental mess. I kept a digital log, time-stamped, bullet-pointed, emotionless in format, but each entry a nail in the coffin of his false narrative. But the emotional toll pressed down on me like a tide. Aunt Meredith called from Arizona. "I just think it's a bit extreme," she said gently. "Connor's your son. Families work these things out." "I tried to," I replied. "Well, from the outside it looks like you're burning bridges. They set the fire. I'm just refusing to choke on the smoke." Silence on the line. Cousin Nora emailed something similar. "It just feels vindictive," she wrote. "We all know Connor can be difficult, but still, he's your only child." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. He may be my only child, but I refuse to be his only casualty. I didn't send it, I saved it. For me. That night, I stood at the living room window, the city stretching below like a web of lights and unfinished stories. The reflection of my face in the glass looked tired, older somehow, but unshaken. I thought about everything Connor had said, every name, every threat, every attempt to erase what I knew to be true. And still, I didn't move. A quiet knock pulled me from my trance. Derek stood on the porch, holding a small box. "I brought over a scanner," he said, "in case you need to digitize the paper trail." I let him in. Over tea, he told me about his divorce, how his ex-wife had slowly turned his family against him, how friends had vanished when the narrative didn't favor him. "I learned that people don't always want truth," he said. "They want comfort. They want the person who makes them feel righteous." "And what did you do?" I asked. He smiled bitterly. "I lost almost everything, but I kept my dignity, and eventually I built something better." We sat in silence for a moment. Then he added, "Whatever happens in court, you're already braver than most." I didn't cry, but something in me softened, just enough to breathe deeper. The next morning, I typed up a new entry in my documentation log. March 14th, 7:42 a.m. Subject, Connor, shouted at me in the kitchen, called me a manipulative fraud, threatened to gut me in court. Elise, present, said nothing. Noted body language, clenched jaw, red in face, pacing. No physical threat made. Recorded immediately after event. Later that day, I copied the file to a USB and gave it to Alan. "You're doing everything right," he said, flipping through the documents. "They're going to push harder the closer we get to the hearing. That's how they work. Pressure, manipulation, doubt." I nodded. "I'm ready." But readiness doesn't mean immunity. That night, the house was quiet. Elise was out, Connor in his room. I stood at the stove, stirring soup when I heard my name. "You're destroying me," Connor said from the doorway. I turned. He looked tired, pale, but I'd learned not to trust that look. "I built this life," he said. "And now you want to tear it down for, what? A little pride?" "I want peace," I said, "and I'm willing to go through hell to get there." He stared at me for a long time. Then quietly he said, "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. But later, when the lights were off and the house had settled into that heavy, almost haunted quiet, I wrote down every word. Because truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just persistent. It was well after midnight when I heard the back door creak open. At first, I thought it was the wind. The storm had begun an hour earlier, rattling the old windows and sending gusts of rain against the glass. But this sound was different, intentional, controlled. I moved quietly through the hall, fingers wrapped tight around the handle of the flashlight I kept in the drawer. And there he was, Connor, soaked from the storm, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wild and glassy. "Connor, what are you doing?" I whispered, my voice barely rising over the wind outside. "I had to see you," he said, stepping further into the kitchen. "You locked me out." "You broke in," I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. He ran both hands through his wet hair and let out a bitter laugh. "You're choosing strangers over your own blood, over your son." "Connor, no. I want to understand it. Explain it to me, Mom. Tell me how you can sleep at night knowing you're throwing me out like garbage." "You tried to take everything from me," I said. "You lied, stole, manipulated. I was surviving. I was doing what I had to do because you made this house so hard to live in." The words hit me like a slap. "This house?" I whispered. "This house I scrubbed and paid for and filled with everything I never got to keep for myself?" He paced, frantic. "You think you're some victim, but you're just bitter. You never let me grow up because you needed to feel useful, needed me to be weak so you could play savior." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "You're not the only one who needed to grow up," I said softly. "I needed to learn to stop protecting someone who no longer saw me as human." He shook his head. "You're unbelievable." "No, Connor. I'm done being unbelievable. I'm being real, for the first time in decades." He slammed his hand against the counter. "You're going to regret this." And then he left, just like that, soaked, broken, furious, and gone. I stood frozen for a long time, then locked the door behind him. Not because I was scared, but because I couldn't allow one more part of myself to remain open for him to break into. Later that night, I crumpled onto the living room floor, the storm still clawing at the windows, and let the sobs come. Guttural, ugly, cleansing. I held an old photo of him as a toddler, cheeks full and smile easy, and whispered, "I still love you. I just can't protect you anymore." That was the hardest truth of all. I was still grieving a version of my son who no longer existed. And in doing so, I'd let the living version slowly dismantle everything I had left. A knock jolted me. I wiped my eyes and opened the door to find Elise, umbrella in one hand, a thick manila envelope in the other. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "But you need to see this." She stepped inside, shivering slightly, and laid the envelope on the dining table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "I found these in the safe," she said. "Connor doesn't know I saw them." I leaned in. Bank access records, statements, authorizations. He had routed funds through multiple accounts, withdrawing in small increments. Elise had printed everything. "He told me it was just temporary," she said. "But it wasn't. He was pulling from your accounts for years, even before I moved in." The room spun. She pulled out one final set of papers. Property transfer forms, half-filled and unsigned. "I think he was preparing to sell the house," she said, "to cover some debt, maybe more." I stared at the heading on the form. Property Transfer Agreement. My name already typed in, a forged signature at the bottom. The lights flickered as thunder cracked overhead. Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch. Inside, my world split open. "He was going to sell it without telling me," I whispered, more to myself than Elise. "He was going to take it all." She nodded, quiet. "He said you'd be gone by then," she admitted. "That I'd understand eventually. That family meant sacrifices." I sank into the dining chair, hands trembling. The envelope lay open, papers scattered across the table like a crime scene, evidence of something I still didn't want to believe. Elise sat across from me. "I know I didn't stand up for you before, but I want to now. I'm not letting him drag you under." I didn't have words, just tears. The storm raged on. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, and everything that had once felt solid now felt unmoored, dislocated from the version of life I thought I was protecting. That night, I slept on the couch, the envelope clutched in my arms like armor. Because when someone you raised, someone you loved beyond reason, decides you're expendable, it does something irreversible to the part of you that still believed in unconditional love. I woke to sunlight cutting through the storm clouds. The house was quiet again, but the kind of quiet that comes after you stop expecting safety to return. I made coffee. I stared at the papers again. I felt nothing, then too much, and then I got dressed. Because grief doesn't cancel action, and betrayal doesn't end the story. It just sharpens the next chapter. The office smelled like coffee and old leather, a strangely comforting combination. Alan stood by the window, a yellow legal pad in hand, flipping through the pages we had just printed from Elise's folder. He spoke with calm precision, but I could feel the charge in the room, the way the air tightened when truth could finally take shape. "We'll be filing a civil suit within the week," he said. The forged signature, siphoned funds, unauthorized withdrawals, all of it. He can't hide behind family anymore. I nodded. My voice was still shaky from days without solid sleep, but I was present, composed. Alan looked at me. "This won't be easy, Delilah. He'll come harder now, but you've done the work. You've built the case. You're not alone in this. That night, Janine brought over soup and a bottle of wine she insisted we didn't drink until everything was over. Victory vintage, she called it. Derek arrived with a new set of storage bins for organizing the documents. Clean data, clean mind, he said, pulling out labels and dividers. Let's get this fortress in order. We sat around my dining table, the same one where just a week ago I had cried into my own folded arms. Now it was covered in paper, folders, a scanner humming quietly in the corner, mugs of tea cooling on coasters. They never once asked if I was okay. They just stayed, present, useful, steady. And in that silence, a support structure rose around me, tight-knit and quiet as roots. You're the bravest person I know, Janine said, wiping her glasses with the hem of her cardigan. But even brave people need a net. I nodded, overwhelmed but grounded. By Friday, Elise was gone. Boxes lined the front hallway, 3 stacked by the door, labeled in clean block letters: books, clothes, private. She stood with her hands in the pockets of her coat, staring out the front window like she might turn to stone if she blinked. I found a place in Edgewater, she said. Small, quiet. I nodded. Good. I signed a statement for your lawyer, she added. And I left a letter for Connor. Not that he'll read it. Maybe he will. Maybe it'll take years. She gave a half smile, eyes red. Or maybe it won't matter anymore. I watched her step out into the sunlight. She paused on the porch, turned back once, then nodded. Then she was gone. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. Not just legally, but energetically. The tension was gone. The air moved differently. I opened the windows and let the late winter breeze push through the rooms. It carried dust with it, old energy, grief, silence. But it also brought clarity. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and wrote a new journal entry. My hand was steadier now. The pen glided. I am not what he said I am. I am not bitter. I am not cruel. I am not alone. I paused. Then added, I can be alone, but I will never be silent again. Outside, the sun dipped low and flooded the living room in a warm, coppery glow. It poured through the window, hit the stacked boxes Elise had left behind, and painted the hardwood floors in light, and something in me clicked back into place. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was peace. The first real peace I'd known in years. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Too much marble, too little soul. Light from the high windows filtered in as pale gray, giving everything a flatness that suited the morning. Rows of wooden benches stretched behind me, half filled with silent watchers. I didn't look at any of them, not even the gallery where I knew Elise sat. My fingers smoothed the edge of the statement I had folded and unfolded too many times. Alan stood beside me, calm and unshakable, as always. His presence didn't crowd me, it anchored me. Connor sat at the opposite table, arms crossed, suit pressed, jaw clenched. His lawyer whispered something into his ear. He didn't nod, didn't blink, just stared forward like this was all beneath him. But for the first time, I felt taller than he was. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Feldman entered, stoic, early 60s, glasses low on his nose, posture so straight it might have been carved from principle. He skimmed his notes, adjusted his robe, and nodded toward Alan. Opening statement? Alan rose without hesitation. Your Honor, this is a case of long-term domestic financial abuse, subtle coercion, and betrayal veiled in familial duty. My client, Delilah Ward, seeks not only legal restitution, but official acknowledgement of what was taken from her. Her autonomy, her home, and her voice. The judge nodded, motioned for me to approach. Alan stepped back. I stood. My shoes clicked against the polished floor. My palms were no longer sweating. I unfolded my statement carefully. The paper didn't shake. Your Honor, I began. I lived in that home for 37 years. I paid every mortgage installment, every utility, every insurance renewal. I was never on vacation. I was never off duty. I was the housekeeper, the caregiver, the bookkeeper. And somehow I became invisible in the process. I paused. The air held still. My son, Connor Ward, told me I needed to make space, that I was taking up too much room in a house I paid for. When I refused, he tried to remove me. Not with fists, but with paperwork, with indifference, with entitlement that grew fat on my silence. I glanced across the room at him. His jaw twitched, but he didn't move. I filed the eviction not to get revenge, but to reclaim what was already mine. And when I did, I found the bank withdrawals, the forged authorizations, the plans to sell the house out from under me while calling me a burden. Another pause. This time I exhaled. I loved him, I still do, but love isn't permission, and motherhood isn't consent. When I sat down, the courtroom was quiet. Connor stood next, instructed by his lawyer to read his own rebuttal. His tone was cool, measured, but his words wavered. This isn't how families should handle conflict. My mother was confused. She misread intentions. We were trying to stabilize things, not steal. Her name was on the title, yes, but she was never meant to act alone. This house was supposed to be passed down. Alan rose before the judge could speak. Your Honor, if I may approach with Exhibit 5. Permission granted. Alan placed a thick manila folder on the bench. Proof of withdrawals, the LLC documents bearing Connor's name, the falsified transfer request, and Elise's signed statement. The evidence here shows not only intent to deceive, Alan said, voice steady, but a calculated pattern of financial exploitation. Connor shifted in his chair, whispered furiously to his lawyer. From the gallery, Elise met my eyes. Her expression was unreadable, except for the small, certain nod she gave. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. I saw you. I believe you. The judge rifled through the documents, his expression unreadable. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence stretched, dense and unforgiving. Finally, he set the papers down. Miss Ward, he said, voice low but clear, what happened to you is both personal and systemic. This court finds in your favor. The eviction is upheld. The civil claim may proceed, and the misuse of financial assets will be investigated at the county level. Connor's lawyer objected, citing interpretation. The judge raised a single hand. Enough. Connor stood, enraged, but constrained. His lawyer grabbed his sleeve to keep him from speaking. I rose slowly, collecting my papers. Alan leaned in and whispered, You just changed the rules. I walked past Connor on the way out. And for the first time, he didn't meet my gaze. He looked at the floor like it held the last of his dignity. Outside, the sun had come out. It flooded the steps of the courthouse in a brilliance that stung. I paused at the top stair, closed my eyes, and let it hit me full-on. Janine was waiting by the car. Holding 2 cups of coffee, Derek leaned against the hood, his smile quiet but proud. Elise walked by us without stopping, heading toward a separate car. She didn't speak, but she raised 2 fingers in a subtle goodbye, and just like that, it was done. Not over, but changed. I wasn't just the one who won, I was the one who came out whole. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It didn't hum with tension or echo with the ghost of raised voices. It didn't tiptoe around slammed doors or linger too long on old resentments. It was still, present, sacred. It was mine. With the court case behind me, and Connor officially vacated by legal order, there was a clarity in the space that hadn't existed in decades. The walls no longer leaned in. They opened up, wide and light-soaked. The first thing I did was paint the hallway. Soft sage green, a color I'd always wanted but was told was too cold or too dark. It felt clean, fresh, like spring after a storm. Next came new art. Not the old oil paintings of boats and stern men in frames that Connor insisted matched the tone of the house. I replaced them with prints that made me smile. Wild florals, abstract shapes, a framed quote in bold serif. I do not belong to anyone who cannot hear my no. I pulled family photos from the shelves. Some I packed away. Some I left, like the one of Connor as a child, laughing in the grass. I couldn't erase history, but I could curate it. For the first time, I added pictures of myself, smiling, on the boardwalk with Janine, laughing in Derek's backyard with a sparkler in hand. One at a vineyard with Elise, back when things had felt easier. The house began to reflect me. Not just my effort, but my existence. Janine arrived a few days later with a toolbox and 2 cans of champagne. She walked through the living room admiring the changes. You did this, she said. Not him, not us, you. I held up a glass. 2 beginnings, not leftovers. Derek chimed in from the back door, carrying a new porch light fixture. Amen to that. The three of us installed it together, laughing when Derek dropped a screw and blamed gravity like it was personal. We stood in the yard afterward, looking up at the warm glow above the door, the porch finally welcoming. Later that night, I cooked. Not because I had to, not because anyone was hungry or waiting or expected anything. I cooked because I wanted to. A simple meal: roasted chicken, garlic green beans, and lemon couscous. I plated it on my favorite dish, not the scratched ones I used for guests. I set the table for one, no distractions, no news on in the background, no Connor pushing his plate away mid-bite, no Elise quietly gathering dishes before I'd even sat down. Just me. I lit a single candle and sat down. I didn't cry, I didn't ache, I just ate. Every bite tasted like freedom. After dinner, I washed the dishes, humming softly to myself. The kitchen light cast long golden shadows across the hardwood, and I moved through the house barefoot, feeling every inch like a reclaiming. In the living room, I curled into the new reading chair I'd bought, one that fit me just right, not just the aesthetic. I opened my journal. I am no longer asking for peace. I am building it. I am not what they left. I am what I kept, and I am enough. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, the candle flickered. And somewhere in the quiet, I exhaled the last of what didn't serve me. The house didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. And I filled it, finally, with only myself. The mornings feel different now. Not because the sun rises earlier or the birds sing louder, but because I no longer wake with a weight already pressed into my chest. I stretch. I breathe. I make my coffee strong and black, just the way I like it. No one argues about the bitterness. No one suggests switching brands or adding sugar to make it more palatable. I drink it on the porch now, even when the air is still crisp. The mug warms my hands, and the wind carries the scent of the garden I finally had time to tend. I planted lilies and mint and wildflowers that don't apologize for taking up space. There's a wind chime that hangs just above the railing, a gift from Janine. It sings softly with every breeze, gentle and irregular, like a new language my home has learned to speak. Once a week, I take the bus to the city. I volunteer at a women's legal aid center downtown, helping organize paperwork, offering calm smiles, listening without judgment. Some of the women are older than me, some much younger, but their stories all echo a pattern I know too well: silencing, sacrifice, survival. It doesn't overwhelm me anymore. It anchors me. I don't have to tell them what I've been through, but I think they see it in my eyes, that I'm not there out of pity, but out of knowing. Last Wednesday, I got a letter from Elise. It arrived without a return address, just my name in neat handwriting on the envelope. Inside, her words were steady. Delilah, I found an apartment on the south side. I start my new job Monday. HR assistant at a local nonprofit. Small steps, but mine. Thank you for not turning your back on me even when I was complicit in everything. You showed me what it means to begin again, even when it's late. I hope your home feels like peace now. Love, Elise. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others I've started saving. The ones from old friends who reached out after hearing what happened. The thank you notes from the legal aid center. And now Elise's. Connor hasn't written. He hasn't called. I don't wait for it anymore. I don't run through conversations in my head or check the mailbox hoping his name will appear. I've made peace with the silence. I've stopped trying to fix what doesn't want to be healed. One evening, Derek invited me to an art exhibit at the local library. Nothing extravagant, just community work, amateur artists, soft wine, and quiet conversations. I figured you might like something slow, he said, scratching the back of his neck like a teenage boy. I smiled. Slow sounds good. We wandered through the exhibit side by side, stopping to admire a watercolor of a storm breaking over the prairie. The sky was bruised and beautiful. He leaned close. That one's you, he whispered. And I didn't correct him. We talked more now, sat on each other's porches, shared quiet without needing to fill it. It wasn't romance, not yet. Maybe never. But it was comfort and safety, and the kind of kindness that came without a receipt. That night, I returned home to the sound of the wind chime playing softly. The garden swayed in the moonlight. I grabbed my journal from the table by the door and curled into the porch chair with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The air smelled like rosemary and soil. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, "I didn't lose a son. I lost an illusion, and I gained something far more sacred. A life that is mine. A voice that doesn't tremble. A heart that doesn't beg." I watched the ink dry on the page, the candle flickering beside me, and for the first time I felt like the story had landed. Not with a bang, but with a bloom. If this story echoed in your bones, if you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, know this: your voice still matters. Reclaim your space. Rewrite the ending. And when the world calls you difficult for daring to heal, smile. Because survival isn't shameful, it's sacred. It's